Well, good morning and welcome to our Bay Presbyterian Church devotional time again. Again, we come to you with Bob Reeder, and Bob is helping us get ready for a study in the Minor Prophets, and he has treated us to some stories about some of the codices that have been used to put together the scriptures from the manuscripts that have been extant over the years. And he's given us some ancient Near Eastern history. And now today we're going to be taking a look at the history of Israel. So Bob, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, John.
I see you've given us an outline, and I'll try to put that up on the screen for everybody to see.
Great.
And I will turn it over to you to walk us through your scholarship. Thank you very much for being here.
Just as an aside, or maybe more important than an aside, these outlines, and there's been several of them that we've put up over the this is the fifth week, that these outlines are going to be on a web page at one of my friends from back up north at my church back there before I moved down here permanently. An individual who's very technically skilled and helped me put together a timeline that we'll use in the class. But he has created a web page, and the web page will have these outlines actually posted on them along with other materials. So
Bob, you have that web address?
I certainly do. Funny you should ask. It looks like we've cooperated here. Yes, the web address is http:// Burrows, that's TOMBURROWS.com /reader, REEDER. Oh, good. You're doing it right there. That's impressive, John.
Well, you know, I took a typing class when I was in high school.
It was the best class I ever took in high school.
It was one of my, I got the best grade I ever got.
Well, I'm not even sure I got a good grade, but it was the most useful.
Yeah, it was. Over the years, it sure has been useful.
Yeah.
Okay, good. There it is right there, TOMBURROWS.com /reader.
Right, and that will have, it has a couple maps on it, it has a class syllabus on it, it has these outlines, and the outlines might not yet be posted. They'll be posted in the next several days. Tom's working on it. Believe it or not, this is not his full-time job. Okay, let's proceed. This is the fifth week, and the last week before we actually start the class next Thursday night.
Right.
Big hunks, what I'm trying to do again is skip over the treetops. Last week we did it with regard to Europe and the Levant generally, and here now we're focusing much more on Israel. And
just by way of review,
where have you been for the last 4 weeks?
Yeah, Bob, just by way of review, the Levant being that stretch of ground between roughly Iraq and Egypt along the Mediterranean coast.
Right. It's the land between the Tigris in the north, Euphrates in the south. It is also called the Fertile Crescent because, brilliantly enough, it's in the shape of a crescent. As it goes around the desert and goes down to the Mediterranean and goes all the way down where Israel is now to Egypt. So that is the Levant. That is the Fertile Crescent. That is the political area, the geographic area that we will be discussing today and in the class.
All righty. Thank you.
Sure. The first big hunk, we're going to spend 2 seconds on basic. No one has ever accused me of not going back far enough. We started with prehistory last week and worked our way up to the Stone Age. The first one here is the Age of the Patriarchs. And again, this is just background material like that. It's a very rough time frame, roughly 2100 BCE to 1876. And as I said before, the further back in time you go, the less precise, the less specific that we can be. But you get the classic in the Bible, the Age of the Patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's in the 10 tribes. I mean, that's, I guess as a theologian, John, you're just shaking your head, but but that's for us laymen. That's a quick way to, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob,
right,
and the tribes of Israel.
right.
And that's basically Genesis chapters 12 through chapter 50. So if you went back in your Bible and say, well, where's that in the Bible? That's where that is. So that's the first big hunk of the Bible. The second big hunk is Israel and Egypt, and sometimes called the Egyptian sojourn. It took they were there for about 400 years. If you look at Exodus 12:40, it says that the Israelites lived in Egypt for 430 years. And we're not going to get into any details or discussions, length of years and all that kind of stuff, but it's a big hunk of time that they were in there. The third big time frame, and of course, the Egyptian sojourn led to the Exodus and then the settlement into Canaan. And that you look at Exodus, the book of Exodus, and you look at the books of Joshua and Judges. And that gives you this period of time that Joshua and Judges, roughly 200 years, from about 1250 to about 1050. And that is, again, the taking, the settlement, the two different presentations, if you will. I think that's an acceptable terminology, John. The two ways in which the Israelites coming out of Egypt after the wanderings and entering into the promised land. So you have Joshua and then Judges. And then you get into this fourth period of time, which is the most relevant. It might be hard to focus on this, but the prior weeks have been nibbling at the edges of what we're really getting into now. And now we're right into the heart, if you will, of what we are going to be talking about in the class. And the first real immediate kind of prelude to the class is the United Monarchy. And that roughly was a period of 1030 BCE to 930 BCE. And I think most of us would be able to, without giving specific years, would be able to see, well, the United Monarchy brilliantly means that the northern and southern parts of Israel are one nation. They're united under one king. And the initial king was Saul. 1 Samuel 10:1 was when he was anointed, roughly 1030 to 1010. And then David, 1 Samuel 16:1 to 23, roughly 1010 to 970. And then the third and last of the kings of the united Israel as a nation was Solomon, 970 to 930. So again, these are very large hunks of time. But again, they're entry points into when you're looking at various books of the Bible, where they all fit in there. And I really think it's important to somebody who has studied history and thinks about history and enjoys history, is these entry points will really put things in a sequence and in a context that will really help give you a better understanding of what these individual books are all about.
Bob?
Yes.
One of the things that I've been intrigued by as the longer I've been reading the Bible is the span of time, as you mentioned, these large chunks of time in the Old Testament. The Old Testament, like the period of time that we're talking about right now, begins at about 2000 BC, runs up to about 400. That's 1600 years that the biggest chunk of the Old Testament covers. And then when you come to the New Testament, you find that the New Testament years covers 70 years, 70 years at the maximum, more like 65 years. And it's really a remarkable thing to see how the telescoping down of the time period takes place. So you get significantly more detail in for a much shorter time period in the New Testament, and big swatches of time in the Old Testament, and so far less detail on any given individual.
Right. Yeah, absolutely right. Big swath of time in the Old Testament, relatively short in the New Testament. And of course, the New Testament is more, quote, current, if you will, from the Old Testament. And therefore, the details and the like are much greater than they are in the Old Testament. So this we're at this united monarchy, and I find it also interesting. Some people may not find it interesting, but it is the way you can slice up things makes a difference depending upon what you're trying to look at and analyze. The United Monarchy, we went through these three kings in this time frame that you're talking about, but most of us know that while David wanted to build the temple, God said no, but Solomon did build the temple. And if you look at 1 Kings 8, 22 to 53 is Solomon's prayer of dedication at the temple. And that dedication of the temple took place about 846. So as John was saying, we've moved from 2000 BC to 846. So we've covered 1400 years when we get to Solomon and the building of the temple. But my point is here that another way you can look at the history of Israel, not necessarily by kings, but rather by temples. And this 846 period starts what is almost always referred to as the first temple period in the history of Israel like that. And that ran from 846 until 586, when the temple was destroyed by Babylonian and Nebuchadnezzar that started the exile. So another way to entry point, if you will, another way to kind of put things in context is, are the events that you'll be thinking about, reading about, studying about, did they take place during the first temple period, or did they take place after the exile and, as we will see, the construction of a second temple? Yeah. And that second temple, to let the cat out of the bag, was built about 516, was dedicated. And that temple is the temple that was then destroyed by Rome in 70 AD. So you have this second temple period. Yeah. So again, broad swaths of Israel history, first temple period until the destruction in 586. Then you have the relatively short 70-year period of exile. Then you have the reconstruction of the temple and dedicated in 516. And that runs through all the way through 70 AD when Rome destroys it. So that's, again, another series of entry points into the history of Israel that is frequently used. So going back to the political world, if you will, as the entry points, after the United Monarchy, one would brilliantly conclude if there's a United Monarchy, I bet you there's a divided monarchy hiding out there in the weeds someplace. And this next big period of Israel's history, and we will spend some time in class on this because it gets a little confusing to me, and it's not really, but you have to think of Israel as a group of people versus Israel as a land and political entity, if you will. And so when we get into the divided kingdom, the northern kingdom is called Israel, also called Ephraim, but Israel is the principal terminology that's used in the Bible for this. And here we're not talking about the whole people of Israel, but we're now talking about the northern kingdom of Israel. So the northern kingdom began in about 930, and it lasted until it was defeated by Assyria and literally totally destroyed and never to appear again. It's really one of the amazing things, and one of the things that we will be talking about is, and what the minor prophets are going to be talking about is what happened, but primarily why it happened, that the northern kingdom was literally wiped off the face of the earth. And that was done by Assyria. And
are you going to elaborate on that in your class?
Yes, that's going to be, because I would like to say I will elaborate it only because the minor prophets elaborated on it.
Right.
And again, we're not going to look at book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse, but we are going to look at what happened, and again, primarily why it happened, on what I call on an issue by issue kind of basis. But a couple real quick things. The northern kingdom was not dynastic. That's to say, it was not one line. Number two, they didn't worship in one place. They certainly didn't worship in Jerusalem, and they didn't worship in one place even in the northern kingdom. They had worship in Bethel and in Dan, where they both had golden calves like that. And it's fascinating, again, my perspective. There were 20 kings in the northern kingdom from its creation until 722 when it was destroyed by Assyria. And for each and every king, the Old Testament states specifically that this king, and it lists the individual one as it gets to it, did evil in the sight of the Lord. Not one of the kings in the northern kingdom followed God's commandment and followed the covenant.
Let me break in here for just a second. Did you say that at both of the worship sites of the northern kingdom, there were golden calves?
Yes.
Boy, that was a recurrent problem, wasn't it?
Yes, and that's one of the threads that runs through the Old Testament. I get nervous because, again, I'm not theologically trained, but obviously one of the threads that run through it is the stiff-necked nature of people. In this case, in the Old Testament, of Israelites, but lest we forget, we're talking to ourselves, the stiff-necked nature of the people, their murmurings, their complaints, their desire to have something they can touch and feel and worship that they made, that they contributed to.
Right.
And it's repeated time after time. And I know you did something on the judges and the cycles that they followed the Lord and prospered and wandered from the Lord and were punished. And that's a cycle that it's, I guess, what we call redemptive history, the progressive revelation of the Bible.
Right. Yeah. Good.
So the Northern Kingdom, again, lasted this period of time. And the Northern Kingdom, as its name indicated, was in the northern part of what we think of as Israel and the southern part of what we think of as Syria. Its northern neighbor was Aram, A-R-A-M, Damascus, and the northern kingdom, that was Assyria. So Israel, to a certain extent, was in a more awkward position because they were close to the 800-pound gorilla. They were closer to Assyria, and therefore were more directly threatened by and ultimately taken over by Assyria, as I said, in 721. And we'll be looking at that. And again, the prophets that are there, 9 of the 12 minor prophets, again, interesting to me, 9 of the 12 minor prophets were pre-exile. So 9 of these prophets that we're going to be looking at in a broad scope were before the fall of Israel to Assyria. Now, the next big time swath, if you will, is the southern kingdom was still there. The kingdom of Judah was still there. And while the northern kingdom was extinguished in 721, 722 by Assyria, the southern kingdom, on the hand, lasted until 586 BC. So they had an additional time frame. And again, the Kings, the book of First and Second Kings goes through the kings, and it is, I guess, amazing. And the nature of people, the sinful people that we are, is that how few, I think there's 3, John, you might know this off the top of your head, 3, no more than 4 kings that did what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord. Yeah, Josiah did reforms. Hezekiah was one that did. Right. I think there's 1 or 2 other ones.
Jehoshaphat?
Yes, okay.
And
but of the 22 kings, very few are deemed to have done what was right in the sight of the Lord. Right. So it starts at the political leaders and filters all the way down to then the religious leaders, and we talk about that a lot when we look at the minor prophets. They look at the political leaders, they look at the religious leaders, the priesthood, and of course they look at the people. And so by the year 586 BC, Assyria is off the face of the earth. They had been taken over by Babylon in 612. And shortly thereafter, 612 to 586, a relatively short time frame, Nebuchadnezzar, under Nebuchadnezzar, they come down. Again, there's no longer at this point, there's no Aram Damascus. That was wiped off the face of the earth and became an Assyrian province in about 730. There's no more northern kingdom, no more Israel there. So Judah is now the abutting nation, if you will, to Assyria. And that's not a healthy place to be for a warlike, nasty group of people like the Assyrians were.
Yeah, yeah.
So they were taken over by the Babylonians in 612, and in a very short number of years, and we'll go over this because, again, the minor prophets, this is the time frame when the minor prophets really see and the judgment of the Lord coming upon initially Israel and then coming upon Judah.
All right, Bob.
I wanted to capture what they are. That's what it's all about. The coming judgment, God's judgment on first the northern kingdom and then the southern kingdom.
All right, we have about 7 minutes left here, Bob. Do you want to finish this up and then
real quick
tie it together with a neat bow?
Oh, okay. The next big time, of course, is the exile in 586. There was actually 3 waves of deportations, but 586 up until about 538 is when Israel was called the Babylonian captivity. They were in exile. There are no minor prophets that were speaking at that point in time, but there were 2 major prophets, Daniel and Ezekiel, are written at that point in time. And then, in God's graciousness, he let the people of Israel return to the land there, and they returned in 538. And the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which we categorize as history books, talk about that particular time period. And there are 3 minor prophets that talk about primarily the reconstruction of Jerusalem and primarily the reconstruction of the temple. And that's Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So that brings us up basically to Israel returned. They become a country, a nation, but they never returned to their prominence that they had under David. And then shortly thereafter, you had this 400-year period, which we refer to as the intertestamentary period of time. So that's another big swath of time that we know very little about. Certainly from the biblical viewpoint, we don't know much about. So John graciously gave me what I asked him in the practice of law, when you're arguing in front of a court, sometimes you're allowed to reserve a few minutes for a wrap up, if you will. And I'd like to spend just the last 2 or 3 minutes wrapping up what we've hopefully accomplished, or what we've at least addressed over these first 5 weeks. The first week, we looked at what John calls the canon of the Hebrew Bible, canon and the organization of the Bible. We looked at the fact that there were 24 books in the Hebrew Bible. There were 3 divisions of the books: the Pentateuch, the prophets, and the writings or holy writings. Then we looked at our Old Testament, and we tried to compare and see, well, our Old Testament has 39 books. What do we have that they don't have? And the answer is nothing. It's just divided differently. And I won't go through it. When we went through it, you can go back to the outline that we did. It will be posted. I think that one may already be posted. Is that it's a matter of how the books are organized, and whether we count First and Second Kings as 2 books, they count it as 1 book, etc. And the main difference is you pick up 11 books, because in the Hebrew Bible, the 12 minor prophets are all considered the book of the 12. And we, of course, have 12 books there. So the first week, we looked at the canon and the organization of the Hebrew Bible. Week number 2, I asked who was buried in Grant's tomb. And the answer is the Hebrew Bible was written in what language? And John brilliantly came up with the answer, went right to the head of the class and said, why don't we try Hebrew? And he was absolutely right. And we discussed this week number 2, how did the Hebrew Bible and then our Old Testament get from Hebrew into English? And there we went through the Masoretic text, which is very important in terms of the most detailed and writing down the tradition and how it got there. That was from about 930 AD, so it's a pretty big later point in time, but it is the most thorough and detailed. And then we went through the 4 principal codices. A codex, again, is just, that's a book, a leaf glued together at one end, as opposed to a scroll, which is unrolled. And we looked at the 4 principal codices: the Aleppo, the Saitic, not your nerd from Sinai, the Vatican and the Ephraim like that. And then in week 3, just because I really enjoyed it and wanted to do it, is we went back and gave some of the backstories to 2 of the codices, really the Aleppo codices and the one that was found by this amazing individual, Constantine von Teschenhoff, and his kind of life story. So we spent the 3rd week looking at some of those backdrops and how the amazing, really, these are very old texts and how they did survive in whole or in part through time after time after time. And then last week, again, we looked at these big entry points into the time, particularly focusing on the Levant. We looked at the large political nations, the nations primarily, Assyria, Babylonia, and then Persian, which led to the Ptolemies in Egypt that took over Israel, and then the Seleucids in Syria, and then the Maccabean revolt, the Hasmonean period of time, and then Rome coming in 63 and lasting all the way 63 BC, lasting until Rome destroyed the rebelling Israelites in Rome in 70 and 74 AD. And then today we started looking at some of the time more focused on Israel. So all this again is a prelude to a class we're going to start on Thursday night, John, next Thursday, October 1st.
Correct.
At 6:30 at night.
Right in the fellowship hall of the church, right where we meet for Thursday night Bible study.
Et cetera.
Yep.
So I hope if we've at least piqued your curiosity, that you might consider attending. And again, the website is up there, and we will hand out tonight a syllabus of the class, and the website has the syllabus of the class. So if you're a little bit more interested in, is Bob ever going to get to actually the minor prophets? The answer to that question is yes.
Well, Bob, we appreciate your scholarship, and we'll just take this as a appetite whetting experience. And we will look forward to seeing you on Thursday night at the church. And we appreciate you being with us here and sharing with us from your scholarship.
Okay, my pleasure.
See you Thursday.